Origin Gents, welcome to UX, and this is how Ukraine manufactured a fuel crisis in Ukraine, in Russia. Ukraine manufactured fuel crisis in Ukraine would be weird, but yeah, in Russia. This was on TLDR News. Some of you don't like this channel, but I guess it's comment if you want to do any other channel reactions. I don't know. I try to find it, but I'm not really good at that. As my channel's popularity would tell you, I'm not really good at curating what videos to find and not. So yeah, comment if you want to react to a specific video. But yeah, the Ukraine was attacking fuel depots and fuel resources of Russia, right? So this was happening. This is a few weeks old video. So this was happening after that. Russia sent planes inside NATO countries. Estonia, I think, and Poland. So I guess I was respond to all this. Yeah, Russia has to be really back against the wall type situation for them to do that, which I think Ukraine forced them with the fuel crisis. Russia's economy kind of relies on fuel now, right? And if fuel gets damaged, yeah, that's a problem. So they're getting fuel crisis and many other, one of those. This is one of those things where, okay, it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad because you're still not at the end line right now. But that end line is very close. But that closeness, you don't really translate that. It doesn't feel urgent. There'll be a time or a day where we suddenly holy fuck, Russia is really at the edge of things. And yeah, Russia is now desperate. That day might come very soon. Then you realize, because shit like this if keep happening and Russian things keep getting damaged. I mean, Russia doesn't get support the way Ukraine does. So Russia has to rely on themselves a lot. So if a lot of damage like that happens, yeah, what Russia is going to do, right? I always fear drastic measures Russia can take, because Russia does have a lot of, let's just say, drastic thing they can use, which is a problem. So next year or two would be crucial to understand what's going to happen. Because this peace thing, they're saying that might be close, but it gets close, it doesn't get close. It's weird. Trump did the Gaza thing recently, there is peace in Gaza, but not really. Because Hamas, being Hamas, still doing Hamas things, that might not last as well. World is going in a very weird place. So yeah, let's watch one.
Full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. The Kremlin has done a good job of insulating ordinary Russians from the costs of the war. Clever monetary policy dampened the effects of sanctions. Defence-related spending triggered a mini-economic boom, and Ukraine's occasional incursions into Russian territory were ultimately snuffed out. However, this might be about to change. In recent months, Ukraine's strike on oil refineries have pushed up fuel prices across Russia, triggering shortages and rekindling inflation-related anxieties about the wider Russian economy. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Ukraine manufactured a fuel crisis in Russia, and why this leaves both the Kremlin and the Russian central bank with uncomfortable dilemmas. Never miss an episode, and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So, to understand how Ukraine's strikes are affecting Russia, you need to know a bit about the oil industry. In short, when oil is pumped straight out of the ground, it's an unhelpful mix of different hydrocarbons that can't really be immediately used for anything, hence why it's called crude oil. Crude oil thus needs to be separated into usable petroleum products, like gasoline and diesel, and this process happens at refineries. Generally speaking, about 50% of the crude oil is turned into gasoline, 25% is turned into diesel, 10% is turned into jet fuel, the remainder is turned into funkier petroleum products with more specific uses. Anyway, as you probably already know, Russia produces a lot of crude oil, mostly via its oil fields in western Siberia. According to data from the EIA, Russia produced about 9.2 million barrels of crude oil a day in 2024.
It's just insane, this data. Okay, every time, how OP is USA? I mean, seriously, they're the biggest economy. Okay, they're the biggest military because of the biggest economy. They're basically business hub of the planet, capitalism, basically hub of the capitalism. Every tech is from there. Oh, by the way, they also have the largest crude oil reserves. What USA doesn't have at this point? I guess rare earth, because China kind of edges them out. But who knows? One day, oh, by the way, we found rare earth in Alaska. There you go. Fuck you. So like USA is like one country. Is this like a video game where like one country got too OP?
4, making it the third largest producer in the world after the US and Saudi Arabia. Slightly more than half of this crude oil, about 4.8 million barrels per day in 2024, is exported in unrefined form to third countries like China and India, who
Yeah. Yeah, I think all oil export to India 10 times got bigger than it was before. But there are reasons to this, like India stopped buying oil for Iran. There was a gap, so yeah, India started buying from Russia. Because for a long time, like US and other countries, like, yeah, I'm glad India is buying from Russia, because if India doesn't not buy from Russia, India has to buy from someone else. And oil being very limited resource, that might increase prices. So like West is not going to buy from Russia, so somebody needs to buy type of shit. It's very recently when Trump come to power, like, yeah, okay, we're condemning India to buy oil. Okay, fine, like we're gonna buy from US or something. You ready for that? You ready for that kind of like hole there? Everybody's prices might increase if that happens.
We then refine that crude oil into usable petroleum products, which are then consumed domestically or exported again. The remainder, however, about 4.4 million barrels per day in 2024, is refined inside Russia. Most of this is then consumed by Russians, but some is exported as refined product to other countries like Turkey. In 2024, for instance, 3.9 million barrels per day were consumed domestically, while the remaining 500,000 were exported. Anyway, to this end, there were about 30 large oil refineries in Russia, mostly in the west of the country near the population centres, which are connected to the Western Siberian oil.
Yeah, most of them obviously in the west part of Russia, where most of the Russia is. Everything else is like empty, most of it, right? But all of them could be targeted by Ukraine and Ukrainian drones. There you go. Like from hindsight, obviously, like how Russia know like Russia is gonna attack Ukraine, self-made problem, but still. But they could like now in the future, I'm guessing they're gonna shift this refinery slowly in the middle and like eastern part of Russia. It's harder to transport, more headache, but at least they're protected.
Oil fields via a network of pipelines. For the past 2 months or so, Ukraine has been targeting these refineries with long-range drones. At least 16 have been hit, some multiple times, and Ukraine has successfully carried out strikes against targets thousands of kilometres away, including the Neftekhim Salavat refinery in Bashkortostan. Estimates vary, but most analysts think Ukraine's strikes have disrupted between 15 and 25% of Russia's overall refining capacity. Unsurprisingly, this has triggered a dramatic decline in diesel and gasoline production, pushing up prices. Russia has recently banned diesel and gasoline exports to increase domestic supply, but this hasn't really worked. Wholesale gasoline prices have risen by about 40% in recent months and are now at record highs, according to data from the St. Petersburg Exchange. This is obviously bad news for ordinary Russians, but it's also bad news for the Kremlin because of how higher fuel prices interact with Russia's pre-existing inflation problem.
Yeah, it is amplifying effect, right? Like Russia's economy was already like kind of touch and go because of sanctions, basically cut off from the world. Okay, so we are wartime economy, but yeah, you need fuel. If fuel is an issue, fuel prices are higher, then everything goes higher. This is usually the case with all economies, but especially the case when your like, economy is kind of like this, where you have to rely on a lot of like specific things because you're cut off from the world. So this might be amplifying effect.
For context, thanks to a dramatic increase in defence-related spending and the ruble's post-invasion depreciation, inflation has been running hot in Russia for really the past 2 years, with year-on-year inflation rising from a low of 2.3% in April 2023 to over 7% throughout 2024, and then a new high.
This is the number of people like, okay, war didn't fuck up Russia. What you talking about? Russia is thriving. I guess this was the time. Yeah, but it didn't last long.
Of 10.3% in March 2025. To bring inflation down, the Russian central bank hiked interest rates from 7.5% in 2023 to a high of 21% in late 2024, making it more attractive to save rather than spend rubles and reducing aggregate demand and therefore inflation. While these super steep rate hikes succeeded in bringing down inflation, which has now fallen for 5 consecutive months to a recent low of 8.1% in August, they also dampened growth, and there were fears that the Russian economy was headed for recession earlier this year. This is why the Russian central bank started cutting rates earlier this year.
Okay, I must say, like, whoever is like predicting recessions need to shut the fuck up. These people need keep predicting recession since COVID. Oh, everything's gonna be in recession. Oh, US is gonna be recession. None of that shit has ever happened. Right? This feels like this panicky people, like, oh my god, everything's gonna be fucked up. No, calm down. It's not that extreme level. I'm not saying that's the case here, but that's the trend I've been seeing with like economists to predict this thing. Oh, it's gonna be recession. You sure about that?
Even though inflation was still running above 8%, more than double the central bank's target of 4%. They basically decided that, in the short term, avoiding a recession was more important than bringing inflation down to target. Anyway, if this recent spike in fuel prices pushes inflation back up, the central bank will be faced with an even more acute dilemma. Either they hike rates again, which would bring down inflation but risk pushing the Russian economy into a recession, or they continue with their rate-cutting cycle, which would encourage...
I think Russia can do is like, this doesn't favor me, but they could increase prices to India when they sell oil. You might ask, why would India buy it? I don't know. You could like incentivize how Trump do it. This might not be good. This might sour the relationship. But like, yeah, you want military tech, like I don't know, like S-500 and things that India and Russia together are working. Or I don't know, like jet planes like Su-57 that we promised you we're going to integrate with your own local system. Yeah, all of these things won't happen if you don't buy this oil at this price type of shit. Yeah, that's not how usually politics works. That's kind of fucked up and weird the way Trump does it. But like this, like one of those instances where you could probably use that to like level up your economy. Again, that doesn't help me because that might increase prices here. You could do that. I don't know.
Encourage growth, but risk letting inflation rise to destabilizing levels. This is probably why, instead of letting prices at the pump rise, as you'd expect them to when wholesale prices are going up, Russian authorities have instead essentially capped prices, mostly via anti-monopoly regulation that limit how quickly individual petrol stations can raise their prices. Prices have still risen, but not by as much as you'd expect given the supply issues, and this has led to shortages across Russia. In certain regions, price caps have led to a parallel black market.
Also, Putin basically just said to one of their people, like, I don't care, they'll just take bicycles. I don't care, there's no oil, there you go. Oil for only essential trucks and things, there you go. Everybody else can bicycle.
You can get a sense of the actual market value of fuel at the moment. In the occupied territory of Crimea, for instance, the local government imposed a price cap of 76 rubles for gasoline and a 30-litre limit per motorist. This led to widespread shortages, with roughly half the petrol stations in Crimea just shutting down, and a black market for gasoline coupons where gasoline trades for as much as 125 rubles. In the past couple of days, there have even been reports that Russia is planning to import fuel from countries like Belarus, China and Singapore. But while this might ameliorate any shortages, fuel costs...
What the fuck? Russia trying to import fuel? Come on. That is like one of those things, like it just feels weird, right? Like Russia's economy has been like floating because they are selling their oil and like crude oil and everything to India and other countries. Now they are that would be weird, I think. Don't you have electric things like electric cars and shit? Like you might use coal or like gas that you probably have, like not crude oil but gas and like coal to generate electricity and just charge and use your cars. I don't know.
Costs about
if Russia doesn't have like electric technology, which it would be weird if they don't have it. India does. You can like have Indian companies like Tata, Mahindra, and just export their electric cars. I don't know.
50% more on international markets than it currently does inside Russia. And if this increase is passed on to consumers, it'll trigger a dramatic uptick in inflation. Now, to be clear, these strikes aren't going to bankrupt the Kremlin. Not least because Russia can just export the excess crude. Nonetheless, it creates a difficult dilemma for both the Russian central bank, which has to decide between inflation and recession, and the Russian authorities, which have to decide between shortages and higher prices. Moreover, it's the most effective way Ukraine has found so far of making ordinary Russians feel the costs of war. If Ukraine...
that's not a new thing. That's how wars have been working for a long time, right? If war is dragging out, you usually attack people where they're most comfortable, their economy, their everyday living. That's how wars work. People use like that Caesar mentality of like blocking off the city. This is kinda that. If you block off their ability to do things by blowing up oil and things, oh by the way, we can't fill up oil, we can do this, like starving of them resources, right? So this is not a new concept.
Ukraine can hold its own on the battlefield, and the underwhelming result from Russia's so-called summer offensive, especially around Pokrovsk, suggests it can, then Ukraine will go into winter in a better position than is often implied.
Oh yeah, winter
Russia's
is
military
coming,
has
right?
apparently been neutralised, and Ukraine can continue to exert pressure on the Kremlin by targeting infrastructure inside Russia, maybe even with the help of new long-range missiles from its Western partners. Ultimately, we live in a world where growing geopolitical and economical issues like these are hitting the headlines every day. While it's easy to sometimes feel overwhelmed, there are ways to stay sharp, and we know that the easiest way to do so is by using Brilliant.
Yeah, well, go to brilliant.org/TLDR and support this channel. This winter is going to be crucial, I think. If history is any indication, Russia, one of these times where Russia thrives. But the problem is, in history, whenever you said Russia, Ukraine was part of it, like Soviet Union / Russia. So this is kind of like Russia fighting Russia in a way. Don't get pissed off. I'm not calling Ukraine Russia. I'm saying historically, since the Catherine the Great, even before that, like fight with Sweden and things, Ukraine was kind of part of Russia in the fight against Sweden and things like that. So historically, whenever Russia had upper hands in winter conditions, Ukraine kind of count in that. So Russia might have upper hand, but so will Ukraine. But this is one of those instances where I felt like tide might change in this winter. For whom? Who the fuck knows? But this winter might be crucial because this will dictate how future warfare is going to be. If Ukraine gets much bigger upper hand, I think Russia is going to come to the table for peace talk. If Russia gets upper hand a lot, support for Ukraine might get backed off a bit because USA and everybody like, oh, what's the point? They're like, yeah, Ukraine is losing anyway. Some way it will be decisive. That's the point. Like I think next year or 2026 or at least 2027, there must be some kind of a deal which stops the war. It has to be. 4 or 5 years is like, yeah, it's been 5 years in 2027. So yeah, that must be like, yeah, something that a war has to end by then. I don't know. Right, well, that was how Ukraine manufactured fuel crisis in Russia by channel TLDR News. If you like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.